Again, is this...
If all of the individual incidents and artifacts that you mentioned were not in this case, and if the university were a state university that never practiced segregation, would you say that the case would come out differently?
It may, Your Honor, and that's how and why we should not have an across-the-board policy that all of a sudden jettisons the important limited consideration of race that this court has approved.
So you would perhaps endorse a system in which a state university in a state that never had de jure segregation would be prohibited from doing what North Carolina is doing?
Yes, because the important point here is whether or not the educational benefits of diversity have been established by that particular university. And so here at the University of North Carolina, of course, it matters a lot because it affects recruitment and retention and the like. But at another university where it may not have been, a part of its history, it's still the important piece here is whether or not the university itself can establish its own educational benefits of diversity and satisfy that through narrowly tailored means. The University of Michigan, in the Gritter case, is a good example of that. I won't pretend to know the history of the state of Michigan, and I know that they were fraught with, desegregation problems themselves, within districts, but whether or not that was a remnant of the state's own de jure segregation, I don't know, but that would be a good example.
Thank you, counsel. You've mentioned the benefits, of course, in diversity, but amici on the other side have argued that one consequence of the school's consideration of race is that it sends the message that race is something you should consider down the line. In other ways, student activities, other sorts of areas, that they get the message from the beginning, race counts, and they carry that forward into other areas where there may not have been a history of discrimination that would, in your terms, justify it. Do you have a response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. The research, and there's some of the research that is shown, and I apologize if the court isn't quite getting here, but what I understand the court is inquiring about is, some of the particular stigma that might be attached to...
No, it was the fact that the school is telling students race matters in admissions, and that the students may learn from that lesson that race should matter in other areas where perhaps it doesn't have the same justification as it would have under your view on admissions.
Yes, so 2 points, Your Honor. One is that there's no evidence in this case of the University of North Carolina's own decision to enact race-conscious admissions had led to any negative consequences, much less the negative consequences that you've shared here.
Do you know, this may be an
also
unfair question, is race a consideration in the formation, other types of activities that students are engaged in? I get the sense from the briefs anyway that race permeates a lot of what happens at the university, and you're shaking your head in a way that you don't agree with it.
Well, Your Honor, it is a bit of reminds me of a storybook when I was a child, Henny Penny and the Sky is Falling argument, because they're blaming that just about everything is caused by race-conscious admissions. But in fact, if you look at the research, for example, on the issue of stigma, both internal and external stigma, and this is referenced in the AERA brief, it actually shows that race-conscious admissions programs at universities that have race-conscious admissions programs actually have lesser degree of stigma attached, both internal for the student and external, what they're hearing from other students, than states with bans on...
Counsel,
I'm sorry.
I'm not talking about stigma. I'm talking about student groups taking its cue from the university and saying, we ought to take race into account when whatever we're doing.
And again, Your Honor, there's no evidence in this case of how that correlates to any consideration of race at UNC or any other university.